sheep or goat? Sheep or goat? This is the thought that I had just a couple of days ago as I was honored to be the homecoming speaker at one of my alma maters, St. Louis Christian College. During my sermon, I spoke about the frustrations of planting season. How it was hard work and you get frustrated because you don't see any fruit. But you got to stay the course if the harvest is expected. After I got done with the sermon, I was in the back and shaking hands, and I was introduced to a family that I had not met before and who were farmers. Also had went to the school, and they had a daughter. And she's about 10 years old and all bright and braces and pigtails. And the family echoed my comments about farming from a firsthand perspective. And I told them, you know what? I said, and I'm going to be preaching on Psalms 23 on Sunday. I've done a lot of research, know a lot about sheep and shepherds. And the little girl's face just lit up. And she says, well, Reverend Portis, do you want to know something about goats? I thought to myself, what does this little girl know about goats? She says, I can tell you all about goats if you want. I said, please go ahead. And as this 10-year-old began to speak about goats, I said, look at God. Out of the mouths of babes. We'll get to Psalms 23 in a minute, but I got to share with you because it's the foundation of seeing this sermon in a whole new light. See, when we read Psalms 23, the assumption is that we're always sheep. Never in this psalm has, from a lens of the possibility that I might be a goat. Or have a goat mentality, or should I say perpetrating. I may be a goat in sheep's clothing. She said, you know, goats are very stubborn. And she says, I don't mean just kind of stubborn. I mean real stubborn. To the point that if you're trying to get them to go in a direction they don't want to go, they will sometimes sit down or fall out and begin to shake in what looks like a seizure. And they will start screaming to the top of their lungs, having a fit on the ground. She said, so often to get them to do what you want them to do, if they don't want to do it, you may have to drag them. She says, you know what else? Reverend Portis, goats don't play well with others. They'd rather be on their own. She says, and you know what? Goats are just intentional about running off and doing their own thing. So you got to really keep a close eye on them because, you know, they have a little bit larger brain than sheep. So they think they're stronger than they actually are. They think that they're not in any danger and they're just going to run off. They don't realize they can't fight. They're prey animals just like sheep, but they just don't realize it. She says they don't obey a shepherd. And willfully, they have to be forced to obey. And the first time the shepherd turns their head, the goat runs. Oh my goodness, do y'all? She then says, goats don't graze. They eat leaves and shrubs and weeds from the tops of plants. So they feel that they're pretty self-sufficient because they're looking to find their own pasture. And thus reluctance in needing a shepherd at all. So then I asked the question, because now she's got me I'm like, oh my God, I feel my sermon coming on right now. I said, well, often sheep will be mixed with the goats in the herd together. I said, well, it seems like the sheep and the goats are compatible. What if you wouldn't make them? Wouldn't that be a good thing? She says, yeah, sheep and goats have similar characteristics, but they're very different. And if you mate them, the offspring is always stillborn. I could stop there and we could be done. But I was flabbergasted. It made sense. I was like, bells are going off, dots are being crossed. And I said, this is why Jesus talked about the ultimate separation of the sheep and the goats, even though at one point they're existing together. This is why, because a goat don't want a shepherd. And they are not the same. This is why the Bible talks about don't be unequally yoked with unbeliever, because the fruit of that yoking will produce death, or fruit that will be stillborn. Oh. And what I was made aware of on that Thursday morning, I'm sure David already knew it when he penned Psalm 23. See, from being a shepherd, he spent a lot of time with sheep, and I'm pretty sure the goats were right there. And looking at the characteristics of both, and looking at what his relationship was with God, and now what he desires it to be. David recalled a time in his life where he was a shepherd, and how he took care of his sheep, and how he loved and protected and provided for his sheep as their shepherd. He remembered what he had to do to feed the sheep, and how he had to keep moving them to graze in different fields because they needed green and new pastures. He remembered how sheep needed a clean water source because they would not drink from algae-infested waters. He remembered how the water had to be still so they wouldn't be afraid of drowning because of their inability to swim and their heavy water-soaked wool. He remembered the fact that he would not leave his sheep day or night because of the constant threat of predators. He remembered how he wouldn't get much sleep because he was determined not to let anything happen to his flock that he was responsible for. He remembered the rod he carried like a club that he would use to fight off predators who sought to attack the sheep. He remembered the staff he carried, and somehow he heard to guide the sheep, that when they ran for the flock, they would get trapped in an embankment. He would took that hook and put it around their neck and pull them back to the. He remembered how painful it was for the sheep to be pulled back, but it was necessary. And he also remembered how dependent the sheep were on the shepherd. And without the shepherd, the sheep would die. He remembered his responsibility to keep the sheep calm and secure by his presence. That even in the midst of a predator being right there, the sheep was calm because they knew the protection they had. David remembered all of these things, and he said to himself, the same way I took care of, the same way I provided for and protected my sheep is the same way the Lord looks after me, provides for me, protects me. David says, I need God. I want God. I don't want to do my own thing. I'm not a goat. I don't have a goat mentality. And as David reflected and sought to express his theology and how he felt about the Lord, that's why he announced to the world, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You see, this psalm is all about God and the benefit of the Lord being our shepherd and what it means to be in God's will, in God's flock, responding to the shepherd's voice. The sheep say, there is no better place than being in the presence of the Lord. There's no greater protection, no greater provision. The sheep says, all I need is the shepherd, nothing more and nothing else. So David begins his expression of theology with this declaration. Why? Because he doesn't want there to be any confusion. He understands to be in relationship with God, it got to be about God. God is not looking to be co-God, a vice God, or God among gods. And out of all of these other things, an idol God clamoring for our attention and affection, he remembers the first commandment where God says, have no other gods before me. And out of that, he announces to the world, the Lord is my shepherd. He says, I don't know about you, but I'm claiming Jesus. And this is the tenor of how David is beginning. When idols get the recognition and praise in our life, it tends to be loud and passionate. We're just going hard for the idols. Therefore, this shout, the Lord is my shepherd, is not a distant relationship. We're not third cousins. The Lord is right here, and I'm right here with the Lord. So stop thinking that you can try to come between my relationship that I have with me and my shepherd. David sees God as shepherd, and he sees himself as one in the flock of the sheep, shouting the exclamation, hey, look at who my shepherd is. I don't know who your shepherd is, but the Lord is my shepherd. He shouts it because of the firsthand knowledge that he has, the fact of the disposition of any particular herd of sheep depends on the shepherd being able to provide. And David's saying, I got the greatest shepherd. I got the bestest shepherd. Look at my face. Look at me. Look at how I respond to things. I haven't missed a meal and not going to miss one. I'm not in need of anything because the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not and never be in want. In John 10 and 11, hear these words. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Church, we have a shepherd who will die for us. Somebody should have said, check that. No, we have a shepherd who did die for us. And he died for us to protect us from the greatest predator, Satan. So knowing the presence and the protection of your shepherd, you tell the enemy, Satan, you just go ahead with your roaring, all this lying stuff and keep running around whom you may devour. But when you come against me, know that you can't win. And church, when the enemy begins to attack, I want you to say these words. I want you to be loud about it. Don't be quiet trying to hold it. You may have to say, excuse me for the office. I'm going to have to go out into the street for this one because I ain't trying to get fired. In a way that it solidifies your faith and it strikes fear in the enemy that you will have no victory here today. You tell the enemy, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. David begins to speak about the provision of the Lord. You know, sheep are defenseless creatures that panic at the least bit of stress. So we got to understand that the conditions have to be right in order for the sheep to be comfortable enough to lay down. In order for the sheep to lie down, they must be free of all fear and stress, and they must be constantly fed. Man, sheep high maintenance. When the uncertainty of life comes and we're panicked and frightened, but knowing the feeling and the presence of our God. The Lord is my shepherd. It allows me to be free of stress, free of worry, and just lay down in the pasture that God is leading me to. When all around us is going crazy, we need to be reminded that our Lord, our shepherd, is with me. God is on my side. No weapon formed against me will prosper. God watches over me. Therefore, I can lay down and rest and let him continue to be the shepherd. The shepherd also makes me lie down because I need rest for the journey, you know. We got to get to new fields of grazing. And sometimes the fields are not close. Therefore, we need to rest so that we can be physically able to make the trip. At times, we're not ready to go to the field that God is trying to lead us to because we're not taking proper care of ourselves. See, ministry and following the Lord can be physical, and we need to be physically fit to be available for what God is calling us to do. And laying down means undistracted. Undistracted. I'm not concerned about predators. I'm fed, and my focus is on the presence of the Lord. Why is that important? We got to be in tune to the shepherd's voice. Hear me. Because when the shepherd gives a command, if we don't hear the voice, we don't recognize the voice, it's going to put us in danger. John 10:27, Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they what? They follow me. One of the things I never thought about is that the goat hears the voice too. The goat knows the voice of the shepherd too, but they choose not to follow. They want to do their own thing. So there's a different response to the same voice. I heard this yesterday when I was at a meeting, and it was so good. At the end of service at a particular congregation, and the pastor was in the back and shaking hands, and the congregations were filing out, and someone says, Pastor, that was a great sermon. And they said, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see how good it is based on the response. See, to hear is to understand, to listen, and to respond. And when we're too distracted by the things of the world, the voice of the shepherd begins to be dull and be background noise. And when the shepherd says move, we don't hear. And then we're attacked and we're distracted. We're led astray. And we believe anything just because somebody says the Bible says it. God told me to tell you. And we listen because we have abandoned the spiritual practice of laying down and being tuned to the voice of the shepherd. And when we're led astray and out of the presence of the shepherd, there's a disconnect because we feel empty inside. The presence of the Lord is absent. And that's why David goes on to say, he restores my soul. See, what that means is that was obvious there was some kind of break or fracture in the relationship with the psalmist and the Lord. It has been strained at some point, and hence the word restores. This simply is to imply that one time the sheep has unintentionally strayed away from the shepherd and found himself in distress. But the good shepherd pursued him, found him, and restored him to the fold. It's a marvelous picture of how God pursues us. And when we are wayward, we find ourselves, he finds us and restores us into the fold. Church, don't ever think that God has forgotten about you in your circumstance. Don't ever think that there's a place you can go or wander off where the good shepherd won't be able to find you and restore you. God is still pursuing you and will meet you in the midst of any circumstance. God is right there. Let me say this too. Some of our spiritual family here may be gone for a while for whatever reason. And they shouldn't have to be all timid about returning. And we don't need to look at them crazy when they show up. That is not of God. It has no place here. Obviously, God has already dealt with them. God has already found them. God has already put the staff around their neck and pulled them, else they wouldn't be coming through the door. It's already painful. How do I know that? Because it was painful when he pulled me back into the fold. I ain't forgot. And too often, don't let your religiosity make you forget about how that staff felt around your neck. So sheep realize we're stronger as our numbers increase. So when somebody is hooked and brought back, we celebrate that. Why? Because God celebrates that. So I just don't want to hear none of this acting crazy with the fellow sheep, with the goat mentality. Woo! I ain't seen you in forever. You still remember what a sanctuary is? You need to go through new members class again. Don't do that, goat. You here with us. Don't get it twisted. That sheep gonna rise up. What do we say? It's great to see you. I love you. You're looking well. I pray that all is well with you. And if it's not, just let me know if there's anything I can do. Walk with you, whatever. But I'm just glad to see you. Let me hug you. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. The shepherd is leading us on a path so that his name will be glorified. Did you hear that? Exclamation point. This means that we may not be at a particular church or serving in a particular ministry capacity forever. That's a tough position many may find themselves in. See, the church God called you to initially, you may come to the point where you find that the grass is gone. You're not being fed. You're starving. And the shepherd has given the command, because you know the voice. It's time to move to another grazing field. But you're distracted by tradition. And I've been in this field so long. It produced grass for a while. It's just going to be dirt for a minute. It's all right. Refusal to move to the grassy pasture the shepherd is leading you to is a goat mentality. Just stubborn. And with a goat mentality, it becomes all about us and not the shepherd. At a particular time, God may call you to serve the church in another capacity that you may have presently been serving for decades and decades and decades. It doesn't matter. But God is calling you to do something else. You say, God, if I don't do this, it won't be done. If I'm the only one that ever did it. Goat mentality. A diet of dirt is what we've been relegated to, because if we're not in the wheel, if we're not following after the Lord, we've been relegated to a diet of dirt. The disposition of sheep is a direct reflection on the shepherd. So as we follow God, as we are provided, we show the world how good our shepherd provides. God provides a glow, a peace, a comfort that nothing in this world can give us. See the sheep of the shepherd, they say, yeah, I get it. You got the house, the car, the position, the money. Hey, but if you don't have that salvation glow, you have nothing, because you're just a goat with a goat mentality. And the goats look at the sheep peaceful in the midst of the storm, provided for in a famine, and praising God even in the midst of the storm. And they can't take it because they believe the lie that if they just surround themselves with things that will give them what their hearts desired. But it was a double cross. All they needed all along was the shepherd, and all of that stuff will be added afterwards. But what the goat is running from the shepherd seeking is only found in the shepherd. And sheep know something goats don't. There's going to be situations that come up as you out going on your own and trying to find food in the world, that resources of the world can't help you. So this is why the sheep will exclaim, not only the Lord is my shepherd, but yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. See, David is speaking to the sheep's reality that there's no greater time when the shepherd is needed is in the darkest moment when evil is ever present. At our lowest, most painful, we need the reassurance and confidence to keep moving. Because what happens when sheep are panicked and stressed? They will fall down and shake and not move. God is right there with us, beside us, around us, in us, reassuring that this too will pass. I need you to trust me that there is a lesson in the midst of this valley. There's a lesson in the midst of this storm. So I need you to keep moving. Keep moving through this valley. Don't stop. Don't pitch a tent. It may be the toughest storm you've ever been through, but you got to keep following. Fear paralyzes, then we're subject to attack. So it's important that we acknowledge the presence of the shepherd, even in the darkest situation called this valley of death. And there when we're there, we begin to speak the Lord's presence. No time to be silent. I mean, we're just loud about stuff that don't matter. Just loud about anything. Walk up on a conversation. They trying to talk about who gonna win this and who gonna win this, who's better, who. The Lord is my shepherd. There's no time to be silent. Death of a loved one, we shout out in the midst of this pain, God, I know you are with me. Loss of job, disease in my body. God, I feel you bearing witness to my spirit that everything is going to be better than all right because you've surrounded me with your presence, imbued me with your spirit. You've dispatched angels on my behalf. God, I know you're with me. You've not brought me this far just to bring me this far. You got to start being vocal about your faith. Stop having this quiet faith. This is what the acknowledgement of the Lord's presence is in our life. It gives us reassurance that God has not left us. He's not forsaking us. God is right there with us, protecting us, sustaining us, continuing to prompt us to walk through this valley, because there is a lesson in this valley that we need for the next mountaintop. You don't want to get to the mountaintop without the lesson from the valley. That may seem counterintuitive, but trust me, in order to maintain on the mountain, you need the lesson from the valley. Okay. The psalmist goes on to say that the Lord prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemy. He has anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows, runneth over. So we need some background on this to get some joy from this, because it's always been the custom in ancient Middle East to anoint the guest of honor's head with oil. Usually it was olive oil. Therefore, David calls it honorable to be in the presence of the Lord in the midst of enemies because he is still in a right relationship with the Lord, even though his enemies are surrounding him. That's why his head is anointed with oil and then the cup overflows. Now, back in this time, everybody was a sojourner, which means that everybody was just moving. It was customary that you invited guests into your home that were traveling. It was required that you give them some rations for their journey. And it spoke volumes about how you gave them the rations. If I filled your cup up till it overflowed into the saucer, that meant that you were a welcome guest in my home and you could stay as long as you want. But if I filled your cup halfway up, that means that you need to drink this cup and hit the road because you were an unwelcome guest. I didn't have to say anything. It was all about what that cup said. If you see that cup halfway up, make some plans for sleeping arrangements tonight. But here it is, David in the midst of his enemies, God is still going to be with me, blessing me, leaving my enemies wondering, how did he get that promotion? How did he get that assignment? How did he get approved for that loan? I know the credit. How are they so calm in the midst of this calamity that I would be falling? When you acknowledge the presence of God in your life, there's this place of provision. Guess what? The cup is overflowing. See, that sounds all great. And let me say it like this. Many have a goat mentality. This is why we cannot be delivered at this point to a table surrounded by our enemies because we don't have enough home training. We have a goat mentality that it's all about us and none about the shepherd. See, if God puts some of us at that table and anoint that head, you're going to look at your enemy and say, I told you when you came for me, what would happen? Then it becomes all about you and coming back and coming after the enemies and no home training. You ain't ready for that table yet. We're not ready for the promotion in the midst of our enemies. First thing we do is trying to fire somebody. We're not ready for that new car in the midst of our enemies. Because guess what? As soon as you see them walking on the way to church, you hit the gas. Not in this car. I only say sanctified in this car, devil. You ain't ready for the table. But when I know God fights my battles, when I know it's all about God and not about me, when I am obedient to the shepherd and only wants the shepherd name lifted up, I will be at the table as the guest of honor with my cup overflowing, meaning goodness and mercy will follow me, and I will, and I'm able, and I can, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Forward my mail. This is where I'm at. All about the shepherd, not about us. And I'm reminded about the story of an ancient shepherd who, every time one of his lambs were born, he would notch their ear to show that he was the rightful owner of it. But there was a particular lamb that unintentionally just wandered off, separated from the shepherd, and he searched day and night for this particular lamb. Until one day, the shepherd found himself at a sheep auction. And he recognized the mark on the sheep's ear. And he went to the auctioneer and he says, hey, That's my property. You see the notch in the ear? That's my mark. I have rights to that sheep. The auctioneer says, no, sir. This sheep was legally purchased as abandoned. If you want it, you got to bid just like everyone else. So the shepherd, his love for the sheep, he sat there, waited for the highest bid. And the auctioneer says, going once, and the shepherd stood up and offered a price 7 times that of the highest bid, so that there will be no question of who the sheep now belong to. So now the shepherd has double rights to own this sheep, by birth and by redemption. And I have good news for you this morning. You may have been listening to this sermon and say, I think I got a goat mentality. I think I might be a goat. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm unworthy of the shepherd. Maybe I just don't belong. Maybe I just came up into the wrong place today. But I'm here to tell you today, I need you in your imagination to grab hold to your sanctified ear this morning. I need you to feel the notch this morning. I need you to know that you belong to God. You are His. You are His property from birth. And maybe you wandered off. And God has been after you, trying to find you. And God has saw you in all different kind of situations. But I'm going to tell you that 2,000 years ago, there was an auction. And the auctioneer said, God, because of the sin, I have the legal rights to this person. Because legally, sin makes us belong to Satan. Now, and God says, wait a minute, Satan, look at the notch on the ear. They belong to me. And Satan says, I ain't trying to hear you, God. They're mine. Let's open up the bidding. And if you desire, you're going to have to bid like everybody else. God gave one bid, his only begotten son. And the price was above anyone and anything could ever offer in the whole universe. But the auctioneer says, nice try, God, but they still belong to me. Because what you paid for is dead. I saw your sacrifice die. It's no good here, because if the sacrifice ain't alive, it don't count. Nice try, God. Thank you. God shakes Satan and says, watch what's about to happen. And there was a great earthquake, and the rock kind of moved out of the way. And God says, now, what can you say about the payment? Because the death angel is now defeated. Now you can walk and not run through the valley of the shadow of death. Now you don't have anything to fear. And as you're walking, thinking you're confused, remember, touch that notch and know that you are God's property. I belong to God. God is with me. Feel the notch and say to the world, the Lord is my shepherd. By birth, by redemption, you do not belong to the adversary. Regardless of what anybody would ever say, you belong to God. Let us pray. Pray with me. Pray with